morning. It's really great to have you here joining our second technical briefing session out of this process. And today we're going to be focusing on the scoring process that will inform the ultimate ranking of an identification of the research priorities for the violence against children, violence against women intersections. My name is Anik, and I am a technical specialist at SVRI, and I'm here on behalf of the coordinating group, and I'm joined by Mark and Shanice today, and we're just going to give you an overview of the process and what we have completed until now, and then give you more details about the step of scoring that we really hope all of you and your colleagues will get involved in. Shanice is going to be recording the session so that we can allow those people who weren't able to make it to still get the information so they can have the background before they go into the scoring. And please feel free to ask any questions during the presentation. You can put them in the chat, but at the end we've also kept some time for some Q&A. So I hope you enjoy. Again, we're so grateful that you're here and contributing to this process. And I'll hand over to Mark.
So much, Anik. So I'm going to try and keep it as quick as possible, and so we can leave some time for any questions. So as Anik said, I'm going to give you a quick overview where we are, talk about not the results of the scoring, but the results of the search for questions, as it were. I'm then going to briefly outline the next step in terms of criteria, data cleaning, the scoring process, and then perhaps most importantly, your role as stakeholders who we'd like to draw on, and I'll speak to that when we get there. Next slide, thanks, Shanice. So just a recap and I think all of you were on the previous call. So as you know, we've been involved. There was an evidence synthesis and a scoping review, which provided the broad framework for the questions and how we went about developing domains and sourcing questions. So those first two steps have completed, and I'll talk about the results. The next step, which will be basically in June, starting this week, is actually the scoring, and this is the step that takes the longest time and involves, again, and I'll speak to it when I speak to your role as stakeholders, trying to get as many people as possible to score these as possible. And then from July to August, we plan to do the analysis and write a report. We will have a workshop in August, a validation to speak again to broader stakeholder groups about the results. And then finally, the dissemination, which will be at the SVRI forum in September, and then ultimately publication. Thanks. Next slide. So, we put out a call for a submission of for people to submit research questions through an open survey. This was started in March, and we gave it almost a month for people to send questions. They were available in a number of languages, and you can get a sense there of who answered in those languages. So predominantly in English, and we had no responses in Portuguese. And so a total of 87 people responded with questions, and you can see there on the right that graph to give an idea of, and this is what obviously tends to happen here, is obviously researchers, academic scholars often predominate, and less so in other areas. And I think that is an important point and an important issue, is that I think that's less of an issue in the generation of the questions, but it becomes a very big issue, I think, if a similar kind of picture emerges with the actual scoring, because we don't actually want this to be predominated to that extent by academics and researchers. We really want a much broader scope of people answering the questions to make it, much more relevant than that. And so and make it less easy for people to discount it, that it's, you know, just a bunch of academics in their ivory towers. And I'll touch on that a bit later as well. Next slide. So this gives you an idea of the number of questions that were received, you know, fairly evenly spread across the 5 domains, and then a number of other questions. You know, again, that was quite nice. I think early on we were concerned there was a bit of a predominance in the first 2 domains, I think, but then that sort of evened out as the process went. So again, I think that does speak to that the domains did also speak to people with who were generating questions. Thanks, Shanice. Okay, so these are the criteria. So for those of you that have ever done a Chinnery exercise, knows that one can choose in theory an endless number of criteria. You could have 20 different criteria, from applicability, equity, reduction of disease burden. There are any number of criteria that you can choose. And after a great deal of deliberation, guided strongly by the reality of what it would take for every extra criteria you add, you're adding a significant time to people who then have to score these research questions. So for example, you know, I've been involved in exercises where there've been 5 criteria. Within each criteria, there've been sometimes 5 questions. And so then for every research option, you might be scoring 20, you're then doing 25 scoring. So you can imagine the amount of time that it takes. At one point, we thought of only having 2, but we then settled on having 3. So we're very happy to share these slides. I'm not going to read through all of these just in terms of time, but basically, we looked at, we've decided on applicability and impact. And so this is really speaking to the idea that is it likely that a research question like this will have an impact on policy and practice, as opposed to simply being for the CV of those researchers and academics who like to publish in nice journals. Will it advance the evidence base of this important intersection? And importantly, is it answerable and feasible to do? What I often say regarding answerability, often people say, well, why would we even put a research question up for people to score if it wasn't answerable or potentially feasible? And of course, that's a good question. But the reality is that given that we are working within a particular time frame, that some research questions actually may be answerable in, say, 5 years, but others would simply not be in 5 years. They would need 10 years or 30 years. And so it's not an immediate, obvious that certain questions are answerable. And so those are the 3 that we'll use. And in the instructions, when we send this out, this will be very, very clearly laid out, with making it as easy as possible for people to keep being reminded of the criteria, and then of course the question that goes with that. Thanks, Shanice. Next slide. So you, as well as the larger group, will all receive a link to the survey via email when it's ready. It'll be in a similar format as previous surveys, SurveyMonkey. I think that's the one we're running with at the moment, but it may be in another format. And the idea is that you score each research question on each of those criteria. It'll be available in those 4 languages: English, Spanish, Arabic, and French. Given that there were no responses in Portuguese, we decided, given the cost, to not include Portuguese. And not just that, also in the previous exercise, we also had no responses in Portuguese. So with those 2 things in mind. And when the scoring is happening, it's very important to all the time keep in mind the context, which is global. This is not just low middle income countries or just high income, it's a global process. And very importantly, that we're talking about the next 5 to 10 years. So if there was a question there about, developing a vaccine for all future coronaviruses, that's not going to happen in 5, 10 years, perhaps. We would need longer, and that would then come into play. And we're asking basically for three possibilities. So it's either yes, no, or maybe. So if people are a little bit unsure, but they think they've got just enough idea, just enough knowledge, but they're not sure of the answer, then maybe becomes a possibility. But this is really important. It's also okay to leave the cells blank. So, and again, we will make this very clear in the instructions that it's okay to leave questions blank. And that obviously, I mean, the only thing about that is that we then need to make sure we have enough people answering the survey to then account for that. So if we've only got 10 people answering it and there's a whole bunch of questions that nobody even scores or attempts and leaves blank, that then becomes an issue. But if at least 20, 30, 40 people answer every question, then we would be happy with that, and that would be sufficient. Thanks, Shanice. Next slide. So with that in mind, one of the things we'd like to really sort of plead with you and ask you as well is, firstly, is that when you receive the link, is to, if at all possible, to complete it as soon as you're able. And you will be told, we'll give a sort of a time limit, a 2-week period in which to score it. We're asking, if possible, don't wait until the end of that period. Try and do it as soon as possible, because that gives us an idea of the kinds of numbers we will be receiving. Which, given what I've just said about blank questions, for example, or extra efforts we have to make to get people to score, the sooner we know that, the better. So if you can do it as soon as possible, that'll be really, really fantastic. And then importantly, and again, we'll make this clear in the instructions, but absolutely feel free to send this out to anybody that you feel might be relevant to. So anyone in your organization, any colleagues, stakeholders, whoever it might be, please send it out to them. And if you can be a sort of an advocate for it, to urge them to score it as well. The more people we get, the better. And as I said earlier, really importantly, I'm not saying don't send it to your academic friends, but much more importantly is to send it to civic organizations, NGOs, CBOs, activists, people on the ground, and reassure them, for example, that it's okay to say maybe to some questions. It's absolutely okay to leave it blank, but we really want to hear their voices, and we don't want to have a situation where, if we start disaggregating, because that's what we'd like to do with the results, disaggregate the results by academics versus activists, for example. And if we simply don't have numbers, that becomes difficult. So please, if you're able, do that. One of the questions that came up in a call we had last week was, if, for example, you've got a small organization, do we want everybody in a single organization to be answering it? There's no issue with that at all. There's no problem with, if you've got an organization of 15 people and all 15 are keen, that's absolutely fine. We have no issue, but rather have that than not enough. And we will obviously provide as much information. We'll try and make it, as I said, as easy as possible. So the link, the survey will have the information, but we'll also have a link to the website where there'll be more information if you would like, in terms of the scoring. Next slide, thanks. And that's it. So I know I've rushed through that quite fast, but I'd love to open it up to any questions, any queries. Anik, I don't know if you've got anything to add on based on what I've said, but yeah. Otherwise, we'd love to hear your questions, and thank you.
Thanks, Mark, and it's great to see Mahendranath's enthusiasm already in the chat.
Shanice, just remind me exactly, I should know this, when will the survey be sent? We're sending it out.
So we will be sending out the survey after this afternoon's technical briefing session, and an email will go out to everyone, and they will have the links provided in that email that will take them directly to the survey so that they can complete it. So we appreciate your patience, but you will definitely receive an email before the end of the day.
So if anyone's got time to do it today, that'll be thrilling. If not, tomorrow morning would be great. So I'm kidding, but as soon as possible, if you're able. I hope the no questions means that I've been incredibly clear and it's absolutely obvious, and it'll be a walk in the park. Cool.
Okay, I think,
Alright.
yeah. Oh, Lauren is now asking, will the survey be available in other languages immediately? I know last time it came, okay, yes, Lauren, the other surveys will all be available today. Everything's, all 4 of them are going to be available today. We were able to learn from the last round in terms of the length of time it takes to verify translations. That was the issue. We had the translations, but we wanted to make sure to verify them. So we built in a different process to verify them this time, so that they're all available together. Great. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email myself or Shanice. We'll figure it out and get back to you as soon as we can. Or there's a specific research priorities email that we've set up. You can also email that email address. It's completely up to you. So do keep in touch, and we look forward to seeing all the responses roll in, so we can see what the field sees as priorities to really advance the evidence base in a really systematic and strategic way. Great.
And just Anika, just to add, if we're struggling with numbers, then don't be surprised to find an email pleading with you to please find 3 of your closest colleagues or something to email. So we may do that, but we really hope not to. So, thank you.
Great. So I think then we can close for today. Thank you all for joining. And yes, the information will be available on the website, in writing in the email, and the recording from the webinar is going to be available. So for folks that weren't able to join it, any of your colleagues that weren't able to join it, even if they haven't signed up to the global stakeholder group, they don't even have to sign up to do the survey. We just try to put trying to minimize the barriers to participation. So thank you all so much. Have a good day.
Thanks,
Goodbye,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.